Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by the Hockey Podcast Network. We are joined now by a very special guest as we welcome on Josh Yohe of The Athletic. Josh, how's it going today?
I'm very well, Nick and Nick. How are you?
We're doing good. We're doing good in this hectic news day that we've had, obviously. Yeah, we're here to have you on for talk some Penguins heading into the playoffs. And I'm just going to jump right into my first question, which is, in your words, just how impressive has the Penguins' 15-year playoff streak been?
It really has. I don't know that we talk about it enough. And I know that qualifying for the playoffs in the NHL is maybe easier than Major League Baseball or something like that. I get half the teams get in. But if you look at the Penguins division over the years, during this Crosby era, they've always had the Capitals with Ovechkin. And they've always had the Rangers, who are going to spend as much as they can and always have good players. The Flyers, for all the Penguins fans hate them, are typically a pretty well-run, consistently good organization. So it's not like they've been in a division with also-rans. They have really good franchises in this division, and just the consistency that we see from the Penguins every single year, it's been quite a story. And I know the Penguins gauge themselves on championships and not much else. They don't really spend a lot of time talking about their playoff streak, but it's an impressive thing. And one day when we look back at Crosby's career and Malkin's career and we list all of their achievements, I promise you this one will be on there.
Yeah, it would absolutely have to be. Even like the down years, it would have to be.
No question. I mean, of all the teams the Penguins have had in the Crosby era, to me there was like one team that just absolutely was not a Stanley Cup contender. That was the team that had to beat Buffalo in 2015 just to get into the playoffs. So that was kind of a shaky year for them. But other than that, they're always relevant. They're always one of the 10 best teams in hockey, usually one of the 5 best teams in hockey. You could do that for a few years, like Chicago for 6 or 7 years. They had an incredible run. But to do it for 15, that's something a little different. And it's really an impressive achievement, especially in the salary cap era to me, which really kind of evens the playing field a little bit. But they're just always part of the story every year.
Well, going into this year, their 15th straight playoffs, what is the biggest weakness that you see on this team right now? They're not without flaw. Neither is any other team in the playoffs this year. But what is the one that the Penguins have to really address going into game 1 of round 1?
Well, a couple of things. I don't know if I'd use the word weakness, but I think when you look at the goaltending, there's uncertainty there. Tristan Jarry's only ever played one playoff game. Casey DeSmith's never played a playoff game, and now he's banged up. So, I like Jarry. I think he's a really good goaltender. I think he's a legit number 1 NHL goalie. He's a very talented guy. And the good news is he did get that game of playoff experience last year. Maybe that will count for something. And he did win a Memorial Cup many years ago. And to play in that kind of a pressure-filled situation and to play well like he did, that's probably some kind of an indication that he can handle the stress of the postseason, but he's never done it. So if he has to play Tuukka Rask in the first round of the playoffs, you're going to give Boston the goaltending advantage. You just are, because he's won a lot of playoff games in his life. He's a veteran. He's been around. So that's one area that jumps out to me. And the other area, if we're talking weaknesses for the Penguins, their penalty killing's been pretty bad all season. And who knows how many penalties will be called in the playoffs. Well, the stereotypical thing to say is, well, they're not going to call anything in the playoffs. But if you look at the numbers, they actually do. Special teams can make a huge difference in the playoffs. The Penguins have a very gifted power play. We know that. Penalty kill has not been good this season at all. And whoever they play in the playoffs, well, maybe not the Islanders, but if they get Boston or Washington, they're going to have to deal with a very talented power play. So I think the way they kill penalties is going to perhaps determine just what kind of a run they can make.
Yeah, you had just mentioned the 3 other teams in the playoffs in the East. How do the Penguins fare against those teams, and how important is home ice advantage this season?
Well, it is. Look at these 4 teams in the division. Their home records are all like unbelievably good, especially the Penguins and Islanders. Like, it's off the charts. So, yeah, that makes a difference. And of course, we don't know who they're going to play yet. We probably won't know until next Tuesday after Washington and Boston are done with the final game of the regular season in this division. The Islanders right now, to me, are clearly the weakest of the 4, and that's who anybody would want to play. They can't score. The loss of Anders Lee was a big deal. They're still going to be a pain to play in a playoff series. You know how they're good defensively. They're well coached, of course, with Barry Trotz. So it's not what I would consider an easy series, but I would certainly consider the Penguins the favorite if they were to play them. I really believe the Penguins match up well with Washington. They won 6-2 against them this season, and I felt like it even before the season. I don't like the Capitals' blue line. I don't think it's that good. Just a bunch of big, slow guys. They can't keep up with the Penguins forwards. I really believe that. I just think it's a great matchup for the Penguins, and you know who the problem is, and that's the Boston Bruins. I mean, we see it every year. The Penguins are not comfortable playing against them. Excuse me, Mike Sullivan's going to match his top line against Boston's top line. Well, guess what? Pens fans don't want to hear this. Boston's top line is better than the Penguins' top line. It's probably the best line in hockey. It's a bad matchup. Tuukka Rask might be in the Penguins' heads a little bit, and the Penguins don't like playing in that building at TD Garden. We know that. And the Bruins, they just know how to get under the Penguins' skin, but they know how to get away with stuff. And Letang flips his lid every single time they play. Like Marchand knows how to get under his skin. They just know what buttons to push for the Penguins. So I'm not saying the Penguins wouldn't beat them. It's probably a 50-50 series. But if you're a Penguins fan, I'm telling you right now, that's if I'm a Penguins fan, I'd rather come in second place and not play Boston than come in first place and get Boston. And I don't think Boston is going to come in fourth anyway, but it's just a bad matchup.
It's definitely one that we've looked at this season as one of the teams that the Penguins have struggled against the most. I mean, they're tied between them and Philly for their worst record that the Penguins have had against a division opponent. But in these playoffs, do you think, even if the Penguins don't square up in round one, if they get deeper in the playoffs, do you think they'd fare better deeper against Boston or in a first round matchup against Boston?
Boy, that's a great question. And there are so many variables with health. Honestly, I'd almost rather play them in the first round. If you have to play them, I don't know. Why not? Usually that first round series is nasty to begin with. Maybe that'd be the way to go, but I don't know because, it depends on the health of Mike Matheson, for instance. Mike Matheson has become a very important member of the Penguins. I wouldn't have said this 3 months ago. I'd be surprised that I'm saying it, but I mean, he's been so good in the last 6 weeks. He's been one of their best defensemen. And so with him out of the lineup, that's a problem. He's week to week, whatever that means. So could he be back for the first round? Maybe, maybe not. That to me makes a huge difference. And while we're talking about Pittsburgh, Boston, to me, the ultimate variable in such a meeting is Evgeny Malkin. Because that Bergeron line is going to give Crosby's lines fits. You just know that going in. And Boston's a good team. But the one thing, they've got some talent other than that top line. They've got Taylor Hall now, but they don't have Evgeny Malkin. And the Penguins always need Malkin to put up numbers against Boston because the Crosby line just typically is going to be held in check. I mean, if they play the perfection line 50-50, you're probably happy with that. So that means Malkin is just always important against the Bruins. He's played a couple of games. He looked okay. I mean, he clearly doesn't have his legs yet, but he might be the difference in this entire postseason.
Do you think putting Malkin back on the top power play unit was the right move? Because I know that's been a bit of a talking point. Like, does it make sense to have him on the first one, or how would he fare on his own second unit?
Yeah, people were asking me about that a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you know what? I would just leave it as is. They're clicking at 30%, and right on cue, the couple of games before he comes back, the power play does nothing, and it actually looked really good with him on it against Philly. I'm kind of on the fence there, but, my theory has always been with him, and I know people have talked over the years about having multiple power play units. But when you got two of the greatest players of all time on your team, and the other team only has 4 guys on the ice, like you should be able to make it work. Mm-hmm. You just should. So I'm okay with leaving Malkin on that top unit. There's this perception out there that Gino might screw things up when he comes back. Like, personally, that drives me crazy. Listen, I know he can be a high risk player and he makes his mistakes. There's no question about it. I promise you, the Penguins aren't going to win the Stanley Cup without him. I just promise you they need him. And don't forget, before he was injured, the Penguins were playing very well. And I think he had 12 points in 8 games. He was playing at a very high level before the injury. If he can get back close to that level with the chemistry he has with Kasperi Kapanen, look out. That gives the Penguins some serious lineup depth.
No matter who they match up against in this first round, whether it be the Bruins, who we talked about, or the Islanders, or even the Capitals, depth is going to be, as always with Mike Sullivan teams, a key factor for this team. And one of the players that is a key part of that is Brandon Tanev, who is still fighting to possibly return to the lineup. Is there a chance that he moves to that second line? I know there have been kind of rumblings of that being a possibility, or is he destined to rejoin Blueger and Aston Reese on the fourth line?
There's a chance. That's what I've always been wanting to experiment with Tanev there, because I just don't like Jason Zucker on that line. And I like Zucker. He plays really hard. He's a good player. I see no chemistry with him and Malkin at all, personally. My guess is that Mike Sullivan will put Tanev where he always puts him, with Teddy Blueger and Zach Aston Reese. That is you have like any comfort foods when you're in a bad mood, like he just eats ice cream or whatever, right? Yeah. That's his comfort line. Like when things aren't going right, he just puts those guys out there because he knows they're good together. They're great defensively. And that's fine if that's what he wants to do. That gives the Penguins some serious depth, because I think those three guys, that's a pretty decent third line at the NHL level, in my opinion. To have that as your fourth line, with maybe, Carter and McCann and Rodriguez perhaps on your third line. Wow, that's serious depth. This is the deepest Penguins team, theoretically, that we've seen in years. And you know that you need that when the playoffs show up. So I'm interested to see the line configurations. I also want to see if they keep Friedman in the lineup. If Matheson isn't back, that surprised me a little bit. I thought they might go with POJ, but he's been okay. I haven't really seen enough of Friedman to make up my mind, to be honest with you. But my guess is, to answer your question, I think you'll see Tanev, Aston Reese, and Blueger together. I've always just been intrigued by the idea of Tanev on Malkin's line, because Tanev, I know he doesn't have the greatest hands, but he is so fast. And, he creates so many turnovers. And Shane Gostisbehere just got suspended 2 games, by the way. We'll talk about that later. But he's a worse offender than Tom Wilson now. Go figure. But yeah, Tanev's a difference maker no matter where you put him in the lineup. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, and you had brought up one of the names that I was going to ask about. What is the Evan Rodriguez situation, and where does he fit into the lineup when he returns? And does he maybe fit into that second line situation?
I don't think his injury is serious by the sounds of things. He should be fine for the playoffs, and I give him credit. He has really started to play better. I was not a huge fan of his in January and February. I wasn't that impressed with what I was seeing. He's just so much more confident now. It reminds me a little bit of Tyler Kennedy for you old school Penguins fans. He's the one guy on the team that actually shoots the puck when he gets it. Yeah. Like, I make fun of him sometimes because he doesn't pass ever. But honest to God, the Penguins need some of that. They really do. And he's a nice guy to have around. You could put him with Malkin and Kapanen. He can play the left side. I don't know. Maybe it would work. I didn't particularly like Rodriguez with Crosby and Gensel earlier in the season. That was kind of a disaster. But obviously you're not touching your top line. No, Rodriguez is a guy who can play there. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up on the third line, though. I could see the third line being Carter, McCann, and Rodriguez if they want to stick with Zucker on the second line. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very gifted line. And Rodriguez, he's just a nice guy to have around. You can fill him in the top 6 if somebody gets banged up. He can play the left side or the right side. He's not a great player, but he's okay. He can score a little bit. I like his game right now.
I appreciate the Tyler Kennedy comparison. I was a big Kennedy guy whenever he was here.
Guy, huh?
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned Evan Rodriguez in the light that you do, and being able to basically fit anywhere, because when we talked about Brandon Tanev possibly going to the second line, there's a certain style of player that has to unlock the capabilities of that Blueger, Aston Reese line. And Tanev does it perfectly. But I also thought whenever he had the time on that line that Evan Rodriguez did the same thing. So even having him on that fourth line, if you want to experiment with Brandon Tanev on the third line with Carter, or even as far as the second line with Malkin, I feel like Evan Rodriguez also unlocks what we like to see from Blueger and Aston Reese.
Oh, that's a good point. You could absolutely play him there. You could. The only problem Mike Sullivan has now, he quite literally has not had a healthy lineup all season. And he might be about to have one, at least at forward. But now he's only got 2 games to tinker with his lines until the playoffs start. So he doesn't really have much time, which makes me think that he'll probably fall back on whatever is familiar. And that's why if you go with the Blueger line, as it usually is, at least you're familiar. You know what that line is. You know what your top line is with Crosby, Rust, and Gensel. So, and you got Malkin and Kapanen are going to be together. So it makes it a little easier to fill in your lineup if you're Sullivan. But think about all these names we're talking about. These are good hockey players. Like there's no Craig Adams on this roster. Like this team is really, to me, from a depth standpoint, very much capable of making a long run. They have all the variables that you need, and no, Rodriguez is one of those guys. You could always see the talent that he had when they acquired him from Buffalo. Then they traded him, they got him back because they liked him, and they just like the versatility that he brings.
Yeah, he definitely brings a ton of versatility. I wasn't the biggest Rodriguez fan off the start, but I think that's because we gave up Cahoon for him, and that shouldn't have been the situation. But yeah, so this depth looks good, but we're not going to have this whole interview go by and not have your opinions on the Tom Wilson situation. And now, since you brought it up, the Shane Gostisbehere 2-game suspension. I mean, there's no real question other than what are your thoughts on everything?
I'll start with Gostisbehere. What a sneaky, dirty hit that! Like what?
Yeah.
I've covered a lot of hockey games in my life. I don't get worked up. When he did that, I was like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, what? It was such of a cheap shot. And I don't know what Friedman did when he was in Philadelphia. They're clearly going after him every game. And like I said, COVID times, we're not even allowed in the locker room. I've never met this guy. Maybe he's a jerk. I'm not saying he is. I don't know. Maybe the Flyers are a bunch of jerks. That might be more likely. But like, they're just clearly taking runs at him every game. You guys remember back in like 2008, 09, 2010 when Ovechkin would just take runs at Malkin every time the Penguins. It was so obvious there was something going on. So there's some off the ice issues there, I think, clearly why they're going after Friedman. It was a dirty hit. I'm glad they suspended Gostisbehere, that he deserved it. But I'm a little surprised because, the precedent that was set 24 hours earlier, and I've been actually having Twitter fights. I don't have Twitter fights with people much anymore. I've been actually having a couple with, I don't know, some guy from Barstool that I've never heard of and some guy from ESPN I've never heard of. Like comparing Tom Wilson with Sidney Crosby. It's unbelievable. Like Sidney Crosby had a man sit on him for 5 seconds and wouldn't get us. So they got into a wrestling match. I think what Tom did was a little different. And especially with the Panarin incident, to me, he knew the guy didn't have a helmet on. He looked and saw who it was and grabbed him by the hair and slammed his head into the ice. Like, I'm startled by how many people in my profession have defended him. Most haven't, but some have. It's just unbelievable to me. And I don't know what George Peros is thinking, what his philosophy is, but whatever it is, I don't like it. And I kind of agree with the Rangers when they said he wasn't fit for the job. I agree. I mean, that this is out of hand. Have we seen Tom Wilson do worse things? Maybe, but there's kind of a cumulative effect with him. And it's clear he hasn't changed. He hasn't learned his lesson. You saw him in the penalty box when he was like flexing, he's the biggest bully ever. And it's hard to defend anything he does. And I will say this, and I'm not defending him, but I really believe the Capitals enable him to extreme levels. You guys remember back in February, there was a game in Washington against the Penguins, and Wilson hit Jankowski really late. Mm-hmm. They may have given him a penalty. I thought it could have been a suspension. He hit him really late. I mean, it's one of those, you see enough games in person, our timing's pretty good. We know when there's a late hit. Like, it was unbelievably late. And there was nobody in the building, so you could hear every word that was being said. So Malkin and Wilson are dropping F-bombs on each other, which was funny. But then you hear Peter Laviolette scream about 10 times. He screams at the ref, he's allowed to hit somebody. He's allowed to hit somebody. And that's always the message that the Capitals organization sends to Wilson. It's like, it's okay, Tom, you're the victim. You didn't do anything wrong. You're just a big physical guy playing hockey the way it's meant to be played. And these soft new age people, they just can't handle it. And no, he's one of the dirtiest players in the history of the game. And when you're that dirty and you're that big, that's a bad combination. That's how people get hurt. He's hurt people a lot. And it's just stunning to me that he didn't get suspended. I've heard all these people say, well, it's the NHL. Of course they didn't suspend him. I was like, yeah, I actually thought they would this time. Like, even for them, this was very surprising to me. So it's disturbing. And, in a few hours, the Rangers play the Capitals. And, boy, that'll be interesting. I'm quite fascinated to see how the Rangers decide to handle things.
Especially after they fired their guys. I mean,
how about that?
Exactly. The Rangers thing is escalated to other levels that people are saying that was Tom Wilson's fault. Like, the news today has been very interesting.
Yeah, but that was I don't know why they fired them, but to me, the Rangers are like a team on the rise.
Yeah.
And I think they're very well built. and I think they handled the D'Angelo situation as well as possible. And if Panarin doesn't have that issue with Russia and misses a few weeks, they're probably a playoff team, maybe. I was shocked when I saw that news, especially I know John Davidson pretty well, a really good guy and beloved by the Rangers fans. I don't know what James Nolan's doing in New York, but wow, that's shocking news to me.
It's been an interesting final week, to say the least, and it's only halfway through the final week, well, at least for the majority of the teams. The Canadian division still has 2 weeks left in the season, but as far as for the rest of the league, it's been pretty interesting, and it's only Wednesday. But let's finish this interview by circling it back to Pittsburgh. If the Penguins want to win or just contend for the Stanley Cup this year, they need to blank. I'll let you fill in the blank there.
Ooh. You know what? I could easily tell you Jarry needs to be great, but you guys know that. I could tell you they need to be healthy, and you guys know that. Any team that wins a cup needs health and goaltending. But for me, if the Penguins are going to win the cup, the people truly in the spotlight are Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. They're still great. Are they what they were 5 years ago? Probably not. Certainly not Malkin, I don't think. But if the Penguins are going to win the cup, they need Crosby and Malkin to play like they're 25, not 34 or whatever they are. And I think they're capable, but I just think the league is so good and the young stars in this league are so good that maybe the biggest question goes back to those two, the two guys who have always been the Penguins' best players, who are so great. They still are, but can they still do it in the playoffs? We don't know. 2 years in a row in the playoffs, they've been bad, the team and the superstars. So can Crosby and Malkin rise up and face Nathan McKinnon in a series and beat him? Or face Austin Matthews in a – well, sure, they can beat the Leafs because it's the Leafs, right? We don't take the serious. But, can they beat a Tampa or a Carolina, Colorado, Vegas? I think they can. Sure, they can. But to do so, I still think Crosby and Malkin, they need to elevate their games to a place where we haven't seen them in a few years. So can they still do it? That's the drama for me. And it's the playoffs. We all are excited to watch, but can those two turn back the clock just a little bit and do what they did in 16 and 17? I don't know, but I can't wait to watch. I'll tell you that.
I'll tell you one thing. You mentioning a Penguins Avalanche and a Penguins Leaf series. I don't know why I hadn't thought about that until now. I think I'm just hyper focused on the Mass Mutual East Division, but that would be peak entertainment.
And that could be conference final, right? Because it's going to be going to reseed, I think, after the first 2 rounds. Be like Pittsburgh, Colorado in the semis. How great would that be? Like, I mean, I'd be all no, seriously. And Colorado's probably my favorite team to watch in the league, actually. So the hockey fan in me, to see Crosby play against his buddy McKinnon in a playoff series, that would be okay with me.
And I actually just randomly realized this. Hold on, I just realized this. What trophy would they be getting in that situation? Are they not going to do the?
I didn't think about that. No touching of the trophy. Yeah, I don't know.
Which one are they even going to present? I just thought of that right now, but that'll be interesting to see too.
What city are the Leafs going to play in, or the Oilers, or whoever? I've heard Chicago. Maybe it's probably going to be American City because. As somebody whose ex-wife and 2 kids live in Canada, I know how hard it is to get into that country right now, and they don't want us there. So the Leafs or whoever comes out of that division is going to have to come play in the United States. That's almost a given. So probably, and I don't know if they'll have fans or not, if they play in Chicago or Buffalo or whatever. But no, it's going to be a little unorthodox, but just to have playoff hockey with at least some fans in the building. And in Pittsburgh, I think there's going to be a lot. I feel like they're going to maybe be half capacity for the first round, and maybe even more than that if they get to the second round and beyond. So not that it wasn't something to watch last summer in the bubble, but this, having a building full of fans for playoff hockey is a completely different beast.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for giving us your time. We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate you giving your insight onto all the Pittsburgh Penguins talk we had, the Tom Wilson situation, and the playoffs that are coming up. We're all obviously excited for playoff hockey with fans for the first time in 2 years. But before we let you go, we want you to pump anything you got coming up on The Athletic. Do you have anything else coming up personally? I know I have your book here that you did with Phil Bork right behind me. It's one of my favorites, but let us know what you have coming up and let our listeners know where they can find you.
We broke a record for expletives in that book. The publisher company told me what the editor said. But we try to make it entertaining, Yeah, boy, it's funny. We haven't had much else to write about other than games because it seems like they're playing games every single day the last 3 months. So a lot of game coverage. But next week there will be all kinds of playoff previews. And I will tell you, my colleague Rob Rossi and I have been working on an article for quite some time that revolves around the friendship of Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, and that should be dropping right before the playoffs start, I think. So, hoping people will enjoy that one. But all kinds of good stuff. Jesse Marshall with the analytics, and Sean John Tilley writing Sean things, always a little outside the box, and myself and Rob on the beat. So, yeah, we will have no shortage of stuff to read.
Sounds good, and Jesse Marshall actually went to the same school as us, so we have a little bit of a connection there. Yeah, Point Park.
Oh, I went to Point Park too. I will have you know. I'm a little older than you guys.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So
it's just a brotherhood now.
I forgot Jesse went there. Yes. So Jesse's the greatest. Jesse's the nicest human being on earth. But no, it's a good collection of writers that we have on our staff. A bunch of fun guys to work with, except for Rossi when he's in one of his moods, which is 90% of the time. But you learn to deal with it. We're like an old married couple, so you just roll your eyes,
Well, last time I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Anytime.